Once we have this team, then we can easily be able to look even beyond.
Recognizes the independence.
That we come with two technical teams, such that we can be able to harmonize this.
But then after that, we may need, as has been recommended, that framework for engagement.
Cabinet memo for the same to be presented in cabinet, but as not is in part of Teacher Service Commission. It requires a lot of coordination in order for us to be able to do.
Sometimes a lot of the conflict that is emerging, that also becomes part of then our key seconds for purposes of fast tracking the cabinet memo and draft.
Delivery requires a teacher. Delivery requires all of us.
Yes.
And the other recommendation, and then a proposed framework for engagement. I hope that's
in good faith for the benefit of this country.
To get that, we can formalize it by sending out a request for the technical team, the lead mediator on behalf.
The purpose of this meeting is for me to establish a technical team and the Chief of Staff. I've done the same for the police and the National Police Service Commission to harmonize the various views from the TSC and the Ministry of Education and have a common stand on the implementation of the recommendations. We don't want a parallel effort because it will not help the process. So we want to understand what TSC wants. It is fair enough. What the ministry wants is fair enough, but it must be within one framework. We cannot work at cross purpose. We cannot work differently because we are one country, we are one government, we are one people, and all this is to the benefit of our children and the benefit of the stakeholders of the educational system. That is why I called this meeting, so that we establish a technical committee to sit down and bring order and sanity in the approach of the process, so that we don't work separately, because that will not help us. The educational sector is so important to our administration and to the country. That is why we have appropriated 27% of the national budget to the educational sector, and and the importance of learning and our children and the sensitivity around the school space. We cannot afford to get it wrong. There is beauty in harmony. There is success when people work together. It helps a lot when we all pull in the same direction. People may have divergent opinions, but there should be a forum where all those divergent opinions are brought together, harmonized, and then we get a common good. So muendelee, mutakubaliana, si ndio?
Yes, yes.
Asanteni.
The executive order number 2, which was signed off by the President, is very specific that we must work very closely with the Minister for Agriculture and the people in the agricultural sector to be able to step up our export potential and to attract foreign investment. As we grow local, we also attract the foreign investors. So we are conjoined at the hip with the Ministry of Agriculture in this agenda. But let me just quickly flag one or two things. The private sector is absolutely important for us to achieve growth in agriculture. It's absolutely essential. And I would like us, particularly those of us who are in government and those of us who are politicians, because that is where a lot of these menenos come from, we must not look at the private sector as an opposition. So when you're engaging with the private sector, don't look at them as an opposition and therefore in the process create unnecessary bureaucracy and hurdles, because the mentality is that you want to frustrate the opposition. Let's look at the private sector as partners. That is what is going to really transform our engagements. I say so because we have seen times when the government sometimes assumes they can do better than the private sector in certain areas, and we land into difficulty. And there are many examples. I had the opportunity at one time to serve as the Minister for Agriculture. My colleague is now there. And when there was need to bridge the food deficit gap through the cereal board, and you don't have the exchequer funds, but sometimes you'd have a constituency in government arguing that it must be government to handle this. My experience was that if you prepared and gave a transparent proposal, levelized the field, the private sector used to fill that gap without any difficulty and without an additional cost to the exchequer. So sometimes when we need to look at the deficits around us in terms of essential commodities that have a deficit, I think if we work carefully with the private sector, if it is in the import program, the private sector can fill that gap and help the government, because maintaining all these talks and expecting the exchequer to pay for it translates into higher taxes eventually for the ordinary citizen. So my plea is that we need to really embrace the private sector as partners and not look at them as an opposition wing. This is the Kenyan private sector, and we should look at them as partners, and we should work towards making them even better partners. On the flip side, let me also appeal to the private sector. Sometimes this challenge is not just completely misguided. Some of these challenges are also because the integrity of the private sector is lacking. For people to have confidence in that private sector, the private sector must also espouse integrity in the process. There's nothing wrong in having a profit motive. But when the profit motive turns into greed, then that is where the problem arises. It has to be balanced. Obtain your profits, but let it not be greed. If, on the other hand, you're the private sector and you're given an opportunity, perhaps to bridge a certain gap, whether it is rice or edible oil, for heaven's sake, on your part, have integrity and bring in things that fit the bill and the standards. Because if it is human consumption, or if it is something for our livestock, or if it is something that is fertilizer-based, please, on your part, also do it with integrity so that you can build confidence in the farmers, in the people in Kenya, in the consumers, that you are a responsible private sector. So this is absolutely essential. It cuts both ways. Those in the public sector respect the private sector, And those in the private sector, please earn the respect by doing what is right, ethically. And that way, I think we shall be able to build our agricultural sector tremendously.